What if one of the greatest secrets to strength, clarity, and self-mastery was hidden in the very act that most men obsess over? What if the key to transformation was not indulgence, but restraint? The mystic philosopher Gurdjieff believed that men who discipline their sexual energy, who resist the easy lure of orgasm, unlock a force that fuels genius, power, and inner freedom. Tonight, we descend into this dark and fascinating idea, that avoiding release could be the very thing that separates the ordinary from the extraordinary. Gurdjieff's teachings on energy conservation strike at the very heart of what most men take for granted, the act of release. For him, orgasm was not just a fleeting pleasure or a biological necessity, it was the very outflow of a man's essential life force. To understand what this means, imagine that within every man there exists a reservoir of raw energy, not unlike a great furnace. This energy fuels not only the body but also the mind, the spirit, the will to act. When it is squandered casually, the fire dwindles. When it is preserved, the fire builds until it has the potential to forge something far greater than mere satisfaction. This is not an idea unique to Gurdjieff. Across cultures, mystics and philosophers have warned about the hidden cost of pleasure. In ancient Taoist practices, men were taught that semen was a treasure, an essence that, once lost, weakened the entire being. Yogic traditions of Brahmacharya stressed that sexual energy, when conserved, could be transmuted into spiritual power and heightened awareness. Even in the Stoic view, indulgence was seen as a form of slavery to impulse, a weakening of the rational soul. What Gurdjieff did was place these old teachings into a modern frame. If men want to rise above the mechanical, instinct-driven masses, they must learn to hold back their fire instead of scattering it recklessly. Think of a man as an engine. Fuel is meant to move him forward, to drive him toward creation, discipline, and higher states of consciousness. But when that fuel is burned without direction, the engine roars for a moment and then sputters out. A man who continually releases without restraint is like a driver who revs his car at full throttle while standing still. The noise is impressive, the sensation powerful, but the vehicle goes nowhere. By contrast, the man who learns to store that fuel can direct it into purpose. His actions carry weight, his presence carries force, because he is not continually drained by chasing after fleeting release. The modern man rarely thinks of orgasm in these terms. For him, it is simply an act of gratification, encouraged by culture, normalized by media, and endlessly accessible. But hidden beneath the pleasure is an invisible cost. Each release is not only a discharge of fluid but a symbolic surrender of focus, drive, and vitality. Science may describe it in terms of dopamine and prolactin cycles, but Gurdjieff spoke in deeper terms. A man wastes his chance to build inner strength every time he trades long-term power for short-term indulgence. Imagine a man preparing for a great task, building a business, writing a book, pursuing mastery in a craft. These undertakings demand concentration, patience, and fire in the belly. Yet if that same man is caught in the loop of nightly indulgence, he unknowingly depletes the very energy reservoir that could sustain his ambition. He feels sluggish, distracted, unmotivated. He may blame external circumstances, when in reality he has burned the fuel of his higher self in moments of impulsive release. Gurdjieff was relentless in pointing out that most men live as machines, ruled by their instincts, unaware of the forces draining them. To conserve energy, to hold back one's orgasm, was to begin breaking free of this mechanical sleep. It was not about repression in the moral sense, but transformation in the energetic sense. Just as water can be boiled into steam to power an engine, sexual energy, when not lost, can rise and fuel higher thought, creativity, and will. The challenge, of course, is that this goes against the grain of modern conditioning. Men are told that indulgence is natural, that release is healthy, that self-denial is unnecessary in an age of abundance. And yet, beneath the surface, many men feel an unspoken weakness, a subtle drain, as though something essential slips away every time they surrender to the easy pull of pleasure. Gurdjieff would say this feeling is not illusion but truth, the recognition of wasted energy that could have been harnessed for transformation. Even in everyday analogies, the wisdom is clear. A farmer who spends all his seed carelessly has nothing left to plant when the season comes. A man who burns his inheritance on fleeting entertainments has no capital left to invest in his future. Likewise, a man who continually pours out his life force for a moment's relief has nothing stored to build the great work of his own becoming. Gurdjieff's message was not one of shame but of awakening. He wanted men to recognize that within them lies a fire that can either be extinguished by indulgence or intensified by restraint. The choice is rarely seen because the culture blinds men to it. But once seen, it becomes impossible to ignore. Every act of release carries with it a question: will I scatter my force, or will I hold it, build it, and transform it into something greater than myself? The psychology of restraint is not simply about saying no to desire. It is about learning to redirect one of the strongest forces in human existence toward something higher. Freud called this process sublimation, the transformation of raw sexual energy into creative, intellectual, or spiritual power. To Freud, the very works of civilization, art, music, architecture, literature, were not born out of comfort, but out of repressed and redirected impulses. Gurdjieff's warning aligns perfectly with this. The man who dissipates his energy in constant release has nothing left to sublimate. He lives at the level of the animal, satisfied with momentary relief, never building the tension that could ignite genius. Think of what restraint does psychologically. When a man denies himself the easy satisfaction of orgasm, he creates a pressure inside, an inner heat that demands expression. At first, this feels uncomfortable, even unbearable. The mind craves release, the body aches for it. But this very tension is the birthplace of power. It is like holding back a bowstring. When you finally let it go, the arrow flies farther, faster, with deadly precision. Without tension, there is no force. The men who achieve extraordinary things are not those who indulge every craving, but those who harness their cravings and let them sharpen into focus. Nietzsche understood this deeply. He wrote that man must overcome himself to become who he truly is. Indulgence makes a man soft, struggle hardens him into something greater. To resist the body's strongest instinct is to prove to oneself that one is not a slave to desire, but a master of it. This mastery builds confidence, not the shallow confidence of bravado, but the quiet strength of a man who knows he commands his own energy. He is not carried by waves of instinct, he steers the ship. The psychological effect of this restraint shows itself in every area of life. A man who practices it notices that his mind is clearer, his emotions steadier, his drive more focused. Why? Because he has not numbed himself with constant dopamine release. In a world flooded with distractions, pornography, and endless gratification, most men walk around in a daze, their brains rewired to seek the next small hit of pleasure. But the man who resists stands apart. He feels more alive, because his senses are not dulled. He is hungry, and hunger is power. Consider fasting as a metaphor. A man who goes without food for a time suddenly tastes flavors more vividly, feels energy coursing through his body with new sharpness. Restraint heightens awareness. The same is true of sexual restraint. A man who abstains for long enough begins to feel life itself more intensely, colors brighter, thoughts deeper, motivation stronger. What most men call boredom or restlessness is, for him, the signal that his energy is building. Instead of wasting it, he learns to channel it into work, creativity, or self-mastery. This is not about becoming cold or repressed. Gurdjieff was not urging men to hate their bodies, but to transform them. Just as coal, when compressed under immense pressure, becomes diamond, so too does restrained energy become something purer, harder, more luminous. The man who refrains does not lose his desire, he sharpens it into a tool. He pours it into the gym, into his art, into building his business, into cultivating his character. Others wonder where his drive comes from. They do not see that what fuels him is the same energy they waste. Modern psychology backs this idea in subtle ways. Self-control, studies show, is one of the strongest predictors of success. The famous marshmallow test demonstrated that children who could resist immediate pleasure for a greater reward later on often grew into more successful adults. Restraint breeds patience, patience breeds persistence, and persistence builds greatness. When applied to sexuality, the principle is magnified, because no impulse is stronger, no urge more primal. The man who can govern his sexuality can govern anything. And this is precisely why the modern world makes restraint so difficult. Everything around men is designed to weaken willpower, to tempt, to distract, to hook. Billboards, advertisements, apps, videos, all cry out, satisfy yourself now. Men are told that to deny desire is unhealthy, that repression is dangerous, that indulgence is freedom. But the irony is that indulgence is not freedom, it is slavery to impulse. Restraint, paradoxically, is liberation. By saying no to the strongest pull, a man discovers he has the power to say no to anything. Freud may have seen sublimation as the foundation of culture, but Gurdjieff saw it as the foundation of personal transformation. Without restraint, a man cannot evolve beyond his mechanical habits. He remains predictable, ruled by instincts, living and dying in mediocrity. With restraint, the same man begins to awaken. He senses a new kind of strength inside himself, one that grows not from what he consumes or expels, but from what he holds and directs. To practice restraint is to become aware of the tension between who you are and who you could be. That tension, painful as it is the spark of transformation. It is the energy of hunger, of longing, of reaching higher. And only the man who endures it can hope to rise above the life of constant indulgence that keeps others weak. The transformation of sexual energy into higher forms of power is one of the most mysterious and profound ideas in psychology, spirituality, and philosophy. It begins with the recognition that sexual energy is not just physical desire, but a fundamental life force. It is the raw vitality that drives creation, both biologically and spiritually. Every human being is born from this energy. Every creative impulse, every ambition, every act of greatness draws upon the same reservoir. Gurdjieff emphasized that if this energy is squandered, the man remains ordinary, but if it is preserved and redirected, it becomes the very fuel of genius and inner awakening. Think of energy as water in a dam. If the floodgates are constantly open, the water trickles out, flowing uselessly into the ground. But if the dam is held, the water builds pressure, capable of generating electricity that can light up an entire city. Sexual energy works in the same way. The average man releases it at the first sign of arousal, never realizing that each release drains him not just physically but mentally and spiritually. The one who learns to hold and transmute this force discovers that it can electrify his mind, fuel his creativity, sharpen his intellect, and empower his will. In Eastern traditions, this idea has been preserved for centuries. The yogis of India spoke of ajas, the subtle essence born from conserved sexual energy, believed to give rise to spiritual radiance, vitality, and mental clarity. Taoist masters in China developed entire systems of internal alchemy centered on preserving and transforming sexual energy into life force, known as Jing, which could then be refined into qi, vital energy, and finally into shen, spiritual consciousness. These traditions understood that semen is not just fluid, it is condensed life, containing the essence of strength, memory, vitality, and will. To waste it constantly is to weaken the inner fire. To conserve it is to build a furnace inside, capable of forging extraordinary transformation. Psychologically, this transformation is experienced as a sharpening of focus and a heightening of drive. Men who practice it often report feeling more confident, more assertive, more alive. Their voices deepen, their eyes grow more piercing, their very presence begins to radiate a kind of intensity that others can sense. Why? Because they are not leaking energy. Their body is saturated with vitality, and it shows in their aura, in their posture, in their movements. When they walk into a room, people notice, not because of vanity or performance, but because the man carries within himself an undeniable charge. The creative world offers countless examples of this phenomenon. Great artists, philosophers, inventors, and leaders often lived with periods of extreme abstinence, consciously or unconsciously channeling their energy into their work. Nikola Tesla openly stated that he remained celibate in order to preserve his mental and creative power. Leonardo da Vinci was believed to have practiced a similar discipline, pouring his boundless energy into inventions, art, and studies of the natural world. These men were not weak or deprived by restraint, they were illuminated by it, their minds aflame with the very energy others spent in fleeting moments of pleasure. There is also a profound transformation in willpower. Sexual energy is the most demanding force in man. It calls, it tempts, it insists. To learn to master it is to cultivate a discipline stronger than any other. Once a man realizes he can direct this energy, he no longer sees himself as a victim of desire but as its master. This mastery extends beyond sexuality. It bleeds into work, into relationships, into the pursuit of goals. The man who can control his strongest instinct can control his weaker ones. He eats with moderation, works with focus, loves with depth, and lives with purpose. His entire being becomes ordered, not chaotic. Spiritually, the transformation of sexual energy is even more striking. Mystics from every tradition, from the desert fathers of Christianity to the ascetics of Buddhism, recognized that continence brings about states of clarity, heightened awareness, and deeper connection to the divine. The same energy that creates physical life, when redirected inward, awakens higher centers of perception. The mind becomes luminous, capable of intuition, capable of grasping truths beyond logic. The heart becomes purified, less enslaved by lust, more open to compassion and higher love. The body itself feels lighter, more vibrant, as though charged by an invisible current. In modern psychological terms, this can be seen as the process of sublimation on its highest level. Instead of allowing energy to express itself only in instinctual release, the man learns to sublimate it into intellectual brilliance, artistic creativity, or spiritual devotion. It is not repression. Repression poisons the psyche. It is redirection. Just as a fire can burn down a house or warm it, sexual energy can destroy a man or transfigure him. The choice lies in whether he wastes it or channels it. What makes this transformation so powerful is its universality. It does not depend on external wealth, privilege, or education. Any man, regardless of status, has access to this energy. It flows within him as long as he lives. But only the few who understand its power and respect its value can turn it into a force of greatness. The majority will let it slip away in moments of weakness, then wonder why they feel drained, unfocused, and purposeless. The minority will hold it, build it, and convert it into vision, into strength, into spiritual fire. The transformation of sexual energy, then, is not just a matter of discipline, it is the secret alchemy of life itself. It explains why some men remain ordinary despite talent, while others rise beyond all expectation. It is not luck, not chance, not external fortune. It is the inner mastery of the most primal force, turned toward the highest ends. Modern society does not make this path easy. In fact, it seems almost designed to keep men from discovering the power hidden in their own energy. Everywhere one looks, there are distractions engineered to drain vitality, advertisements filled with hypersexualized images, endless pornography at the click of a button, casual relationships celebrated without depth or commitment, and an entire culture that tells men indulgence is freedom. Yet beneath the surface, what looks like freedom often becomes chains. When a man chases constant stimulation, he becomes weaker, more restless, and more dependent. He begins to live not by his own will but by the impulses triggered in him by forces outside his control. Gurdjieff warned that man is mostly mechanical. He does not think, feel, or act freely, but reacts like a machine to stimuli. Nowhere is this more evident than in how men respond to their sexual urges. Algorithms on screens know this well. Social media, streaming platforms, and industries thrive by keeping men locked in a loop of craving and release, offering endless novelty to ensure that no one builds the strength to resist. The man who indulges daily becomes predictable, easy to manipulate, easy to sell to. His mind is scattered, his body is tired, his willpower is dulled. This is not a coincidence, it is the result of an environment built on distraction. But what happens when a man learns to resist? When he chooses not to give in to every urge, he begins to step outside of this machinery. He realizes that most men are trapped in cycles of instant gratification, but he does not have to be. Each act of restraint becomes a rebellion against a system that profits from his weakness. With every moment of self-control, he takes back a fragment of his own freedom. He begins to see clearly how much of modern life is designed to keep him sedated, entertained, and weak. And in this clarity, he begins to grow. The challenges, however, are immense. Modern men live in a constant storm of stimulation. Unlike the past, where temptation was limited by environment and culture, today it is delivered in the palm of the hand at all hours. A man must be stronger than ever before to resist it. He must develop not only discipline but also awareness. He must train himself to notice when his energy is being drained, when his mind is being hijacked, when his habits are being shaped by forces outside of him. Without this awareness, he remains a slave, believing he is free while chains are fastened around him. Psychologically, this resistance builds resilience. Each time a man refuses temptation, his willpower strengthens. Modern neuroscience supports this. Self-control functions like a muscle, growing with use. The man who conserves his energy in a world designed to exploit it develops a kind of inner toughness that others lack. He is no longer as easily swayed by trends, manipulated by advertising, or enslaved by impulses. His decisions are deliberate, not reactive. This quality alone sets him apart in an age where attention spans are shrinking and self-discipline is rare. The cultural consequences of indulgence are visible everywhere. Men drained of vitality are men without purpose. They drift, consume endlessly, but produce little. They lack the fire to pursue long-term goals, to cultivate depth in relationships, or to rise to the challenges of life. Compare this to a man who resists. He is not perfect, he is not untouched by struggle, but he carries within him a current of energy that can be directed toward achievement. He is less interested in temporary pleasures and more drawn to lasting meaning. The same environment that weakens others becomes the training ground where he strengthens himself. Philosophers have long warned of the dangers of indulgence. The Stoics saw indulgence as slavery, teaching that the man who cannot control his desires is not free, no matter how powerful he appears. Nietzsche spoke of the will to power, not as domination over others, but as mastery over the chaos within oneself. Freud observed that civilization itself was built upon the sublimation of instinct, the channeling of primal drives into higher forms of culture. Gurdjieff took this further, insisting that modern man must become conscious of his mechanical habits if he is ever to wake up. Resisting indulgence is not just about conserving energy, it is about becoming aware, becoming awake. In practical terms, this resistance creates opportunities for transformation. A man who stops wasting his vitality discovers he has time, focus, and energy that he never knew existed. The hours once lost to indulgence can be poured into learning, building, creating, or deepening connections. The mind once fogged by exhaustion clears, revealing insights and inspirations. The body once dulled by overindulgence grows stronger, more vibrant, more resilient. What once seemed impossible becomes achievable because the man finally has the fuel to pursue it. Yet society will not applaud this path. A man who resists indulgence is often mocked as strange, outdated, or repressed. This is because he is not easy to control. He is harder to sell to, harder to manipulate, harder to keep distracted. He carries within himself an inner power that shines through, and this unsettles a culture built on keeping people dependent. His very existence becomes a challenge, a quiet reminder to others that their weakness is not inevitable. To stand firm in this age is to walk a lonely road at times, but it is also to walk a path of deep meaning. The challenges of modern society are real, and the distractions are overwhelming. But the man who learns to resist them becomes something rare, something extraordinary, a man who has reclaimed his freedom in a world where most have given it away without even realizing it. When a man learns to master his sexual energy, the effects ripple into every corner of his life. What begins as a personal choice, to resist indulgence, to conserve, to transform, becomes the foundation of a new identity. Instead of being ruled by instinct, he becomes guided by vision. Instead of chasing short-term pleasure, he starts chasing meaning. And with that shift, something extraordinary awakens within him, a sense of creative power that seems almost limitless. This is what Gurdjieff hinted at when he spoke of inner alchemy, the transformation of base impulses into higher forms of consciousness. The very energy that once left a man weakened and scattered can be redirected into building, creating, achieving, and loving with far greater depth. One of the most immediate transformations occurs in the realm of confidence. A man who conserves his energy carries himself differently. His presence is stronger, his gaze more grounded, his voice more certain. People feel this without him saying a word. It is as if his body radiates vitality, because it does. Ancient traditions often spoke of aura, or chi, but modern science observes it in subtler ways: posture, tone, skin, energy levels, and nonverbal communication. Men who waste themselves excessively often appear drained, restless, or hollow, while men who practice control radiate composure and strength. Others instinctively respect it because it signals mastery, and mastery is always magnetic. Beyond confidence lies clarity. When a man is no longer chained to the cycle of release and regret, his mind begins to settle. He is no longer constantly distracted by urges, guilt, or exhaustion. His thoughts sharpen, his focus deepens, and he can see further into the patterns of his own life. This clarity naturally leads to better decisions, financial, relational, professional. Opportunities that once slipped through his fingers because he was too fogged or fatigued now become visible and achievable. The energy he once lost in hours of indulgence is suddenly available for discipline, for study, for growth. The difference is not small. It can be the line between a man who lives reactively and a man who begins to shape his destiny. This transformation also fuels creativity. Freud noted that many of the world's greatest cultural achievements were the result of sublimated sexual energy, music, art, literature, even scientific breakthroughs. Men who learn to redirect this energy often report sudden bursts of inspiration, a drive to build, to express, to innovate. It is not mystical, it is practical. The brain and body are no longer drained, so the surplus energy naturally seeks other outlets. The fire that once burned in mere moments of pleasure now burns steadily in the creation of something lasting. Some of history's most driven figures, philosophers, inventors, spiritual leaders, understood this law, whether consciously or intuitively. Relationships, too, take on new depth. A man who no longer views women as objects of constant desire begins to connect with them differently. He values presence over possession, intimacy over indulgence. This makes his relationships more stable, more authentic, more enduring. Women sense when a man is not needy, when he does not approach them from a place of emptiness but from a place of fullness. He does not demand energy, he shares it. This shift often leads to partnerships rooted in respect and growth rather than in cycles of lust and disappointment. Ironically, by withholding his energy, he becomes more attractive, because he is not controlled by his desires, he is guided by his purpose. Spiritually, the change is even more profound. Nearly every ancient tradition taught that sexual energy is sacred, a raw life force that can either elevate or enslave. Yogis spoke of kundalini rising, alchemists of transmuting lead into gold, mystics of divine union. While these metaphors differ, the essence is the same. When a man learns to master his energy, he unlocks higher states of awareness. He feels more connected to himself, to others, to life itself. He discovers that the body is not merely flesh but a vessel of power, and that by mastering it, he can awaken parts of his soul he never knew existed. Modern psychology confirms much of this in different language. Delayed gratification, impulse control, and channeling drives into meaningful work are consistently linked to higher achievement, healthier relationships, and deeper fulfillment. What Gurdjieff taught in esoteric terms, science now echoes in empirical ones. Mastery over desire builds a stronger man. It makes him less reactive, more resilient, and more capable of directing his life with purpose. This transformation, however, is not automatic. It requires patience, discipline, and self-awareness. Many men try to quit indulgence but fall back because they do not understand the deeper meaning behind the practice. It is not about mere abstinence, it is about transformation. The energy must be redirected, not merely suppressed. If it is suppressed, it turns to frustration. If it is redirected, it becomes fuel. This is why men who succeed in this path are often those who simultaneously pursue goals, creative outlets, spiritual practices, or disciplines that give the energy somewhere higher to flow. Over time, this practice builds something far greater than confidence or creativity. It builds inner power. A man begins to feel that he is no longer a slave to his urges, to society's traps, or even to his own mechanical patterns. He begins to sense a freedom that others cannot imagine, because most have never tasted it. This inner power does not mean domination over others, but mastery over himself. And mastery, once tasted, becomes the foundation of a life lived with purpose, strength, and unshakable will.